you can understand that we are not trying to fit into a homogenized box of X who turns up every day and performs at exactly the same rate. Technology to not homogenize the human experience but elevate difference is where AI comes into place.
In this episode, I talked to Amy Thompson, who owns a company called Moody Month. And this app is about understanding women. Women log in and tell each and every day the things that they're going through, so that the app can then help them understand what to do the next day, the next week, the next month. And there's a great feature as well that tells the partner what to do as well, a little bit like a weather forecast. So, Stephen Hawking, before he died, he always famously said that you understand the universe, but you can't understand women. And it's always been a bit of a joke, and I feel a really insensitive joke to play as well. But in this episode, I hope that men and women will get a lot of value in understanding better how women work physiologically, mentally, and that can help relationships and people live much, much better lives. And of course, because it's an AI podcast, we threw a lot about AI as well and how AI can help people do that as well. So I hope you enjoy it, and please give me a lot of feedback later on as well once you've watched it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment as well. Thank you. Hello, Amy, and welcome to AI McGarry. It's all about AI podcast. And I'm super excited to talk to you today. I think today in this conversation, we're going to unlock a lot about women's health, how women's mental health affects their physical health, how hormones affects all of that, and also how does that affect the relationship a woman is in, either with another woman or a man. So how would you introduce yourself for people who don't know you?
So I'm Amy. I'm the founder of Moody Month, and we have built technology that forecasts daily emotional, physical symptom changes associated to hormones. So it's like a weather forecast for your mind and body to help you understand how hormones are impacting on your everyday. There's a few other background pieces, but I'm sure we'll get into that conversation in a minute.
Yeah. And, always with the founders of companies, there is a story behind that, right? Like, How did you get into it? Why did you start this company? Did you go through some personal experience that got you to this?
So I think all the best ideas are almost a hybrid of your personal and your professional life. And so I had a business before starting Moody, which was actually before Instagram even existed, early doors social media, bridging this physical experience, so events, with understanding the trackability and traceability of how social media could be used within that. So we built the company in 2011, sold it in 2016. Huge clients like Nike and Royal Bank of Scotland. And so we had this incredible experience of being on the growth trajectory of data in communications. What was fascinating for me about that was two things. One, how fast technology was growing and changing the world with brands spending in the way that they were. But also I was working with one of the biggest health brands, arguably in the world. We were working with Nike, understanding kind of how health and technologies and products intersected. The thing that was interesting to me, though, about that was there was no difference between the male experience and the female experience. If you think about things like running apps or technologies in the space, everything treated everyone as the same with the same experience. In the process of working on some of those projects, I realized hormones are the fundamental differentiator in how we can understand the difference through data of a better experience, a more personalized experience. But also personally, I was young. I was 24 when I started that company, and I was pushing myself to the limits. I had started to travel all over the world all the time to big meetings, big talks, everything, and my body burnt out and my periods completely stopped. So not only was I having this kind of front exposure to understanding the importance of personalization and the importance of this health data in understanding difference and self, I was also personally experiencing something which made me realize that hormones are not just about fertility and contraception, which is how we're taught about them in school and how we all understand them really primarily. They're about mental, physical health optimization. And it wasn't really until about the third year of having this challenge or this endless kind of burnout, kind of high-low, that I realized there were really simple things I could do in my nutrition, in my exercise, which would fundamentally bring my periods back, but also balance my body. It wasn't a single pill that you could take. There's no pharmaceutical solution. You have to not push your body in high intensity of exercise. So I had to stop running all the time, which I was doing, which was compounding the stress and the problem. And I had to remove stimulants like coffee and sugar for periods of time to help rebalance my body. I was like, why is this costing so much money to have access to this information when actually super simple? So the inception story of Moody is a professional and personal crossover, but also selling Scene and selling that business was a really important moment for me, my body, my mind. And it was interesting because as soon as I made the decision to sell that company and went through that process, my body re-regulated. It was like the stress and the understanding aligned me into such a specific place. And that's when I realized this is 100% what we need to start to focus on and when we needed to start to build.
Yeah, we're going to get into the psychology of health as well, because that plays a really huge part. What would you say to women of different ages who perhaps believe right now, looking at their hormones and their cycles is not really that important? It's something that only you have to look at later in your 30s, 40s plus. What would you say to women at different ages?
I think most women actually do have a sense that hormones are important. We're just not given the language to be able to articulate it for ourselves. We're given information about fertility, contraception, how to get pregnant, how to avoid it, but we're not given information about these changing, nuanced experiences that happen to us all on a regular basis. And so it's not just chronic conditions or kind of issues that allow for certainly a female experience to tune into hormones, but it is important for us to all have the language to help articulate and understand how and why these chemicals within our body are changing our personality, essentially, almost on a kind of bi-monthly basis. And I think I was saying about understanding in your 20s, you kind of feel you can take on everything, you can do anything, you're pushing yourself, you have unlimited energy. And then as soon as you hit your 30s, your metabolism changes, your mental health starts to change. Yeah. It tends to be at that point that women start to seek the answers. It's not just when things go wrong. It's at a point when your body starts to change and those mental health implications that you've always felt happening really start to become more pronounced. And that's a kind of generalized experience. Obviously, every female experience is slightly different, but that's also where technology is really important in this space, is understanding that nuance and that differentiation is where technology plays a role.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I used to be head of AI for one of the world's largest healthcare companies, one thing that we were driving towards was, instead of being reactive, trying to be proactive towards your health, right?
Yep.
So I guess what you're saying as well is if a woman in her 20s starts researches a little bit more, it will kind of soften the impact when she gets to 30, and then she knows better what to do at that point as well. So it's a little bit about improving how the transitions happen because they have a little bit of knowledge beforehand, putting a little bit of more of the proactive side of things towards the hormones and cycles.
Exactly. And I think, again, this is about a re-education of self, and this proactive approach is how we better understand. We've historically handed over our health to experts, and it's not to say that when you need intervention that isn't important, but they're also, it's like the manual for your health. It's why don't we learn that in school? Why do we not learn that your hormones have a huge impact on your everyday health? And if you start to understand that, you understand your body as a tool for productivity, you have better relationships with your mental health. So yeah, this kind of new era of re-education, and I think hormone health is front and center in how we actually optimize for that.
So I've had this experience personally with partners and my current wife as well. A hormone being off by even 2% can have a profound difference. It can change the rhythm of your heart. It can change the temperature of your body. It can give you massive mood swings. You have problems sleeping, palpitations. I mean, it goes on, the list goes on and on. So just for those people who don't understand, how important is a hormone? Because when people talk about hormones, especially men, you think of, okay, hormones to go to the gym and get big, right? They almost don't think of the body having hormones. And also educate people also on the fact that, women actually have testosterone like men do. And it's actually the second biggest hormone in their body.
Yeah, so I think it comes down to, you don't need a PhD in understanding hormones to understand the importance of the baselines. And so you have 3 key hormones from a female experience that interplay. Let's take a menstrual cycle as the kind of primary focus there, where you have the interplay of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. So the way that those 3 kind of power hormones essentially interplay are across 4 phases within the month. You have your bleed phase when your hormones are at their lowest. So
men, please get your pen out and
Let's
learn this. This is so important. And we're going to get into also what you should do at different phases to help your partner do better and have a better relationship with your partner as well. This is so important.
Yeah.
This will literally save your relationship in your life.
Well, I mean, and we can come on to kind of what the most powerful feedback and impacts that Moody has had in the world and what this app has done for people, which is around really optimizing language for self and communication with your partners.
So back to the cycles. Let's start again.
Cycle.
Let's make sure everyone's got their pens now. They're ready.
So you have 4 phases. You have your bleed phase, which is when your hormones are at their lowest. But as soon as your bleed is triggered, your kind of estrogen is at lowest, but it begins to rise towards the end of your bleed. So as your bleed kind of subsides, your hormones begin to rise. So you have this kind of rising estrogen effect. I'm going to be very simple and reductive about this because you then move into your follicular phase, which we call your rise phase in the app, which is where your estrogen is literally rising steadily each day. Now, that is a power hormone. So estrogen gives you more energy, more focus, more articulation. It changes the way you speak. It also even changes your skin, your hair. It creates this kind of energizing experience. Now, when your estrogen rises towards ovulation, so that's the peak of your hormonal cycle across the phases, the ovulation is your power up days. Now, there are 2 very distinct experiences that women can have around ovulation. The majority is this idea of elevation, confidence, strength, but there's also a trigger that ovulation and kind of this rising estrogen can have where it creates more anxiety. So you can actually feel almost like having too many coffees, that experience of you suddenly feel a bit over-energized, a bit too kind of aware of your environment. So you need to understand how these things are impacting. But ultimately, the first 2 phases are rising estrogen, and then post your ovulatory phase, you then move into a rising progesterone, which is more of what they call a sedating hormone, which can create this more introverted character, a more introverted sense of self. As your estrogen essentially declines because your progesterone rises, you suddenly have this inversion of more anxiety, potentially more introverted personality. You have a sense of sensitivity. Your pain thresholds are actually lower. So you feel things physically more as well. So I think the baseline here is you have almost 4 distinct experiences within a month. Doesn't mean that those experiences are really clearly defined. You just have a gradual sense of change, and that affects your mental health. It affects your focus, your energy, your mood, your relationships, everything. For some people, that's very, very distinctly defined. And for some, there's a nod to it, there's a notice. But if you are menstruating, you will experience changes. And the difference between that and a male experience is male hormone cycles are 24 hours around testosterone. It resets every morning, essentially. Now, there's a big conversation to have around how and what the reality around those male experiences are, because you have certain changes across life cycles, and definitely testosterone after 45 has huge decline. So there's a conversation there. But from a female experience, it is much more defined around this changes on a monthly basis across life cycles rather than on a daily basis across life cycles, which is, very, very important in terms of understandings of mental and physical health.
Great. And the way you described it is quite simple.
Yes,
like you said,
100%.
every month can be slightly different. Depends what's happening in your life, mentally, stress levels, etc. I think it's so important for men especially to understand these cycles and these stages that women go through. Because it's very easy for a man to kind of, when a woman is a little bit moody, right, exactly. Which can be at certain stages, and just say, she's this and she's that. I think it's a very lazy approach to take your relationship in. And it's in trying to understand your partner, it's not just about understanding, what they did when they were a child and their hobbies and who are their friends. It's, getting to know their cycles, right? Getting to know the stages that they're at, and then knowing what to do at different stages.
Absolutely.
So let's talk first about what should women do at each stage to optimize their experience, to kind of ease the burden a little bit. And then we'll talk about the other side of the table, what men should do to help their female partners do better in each of those stages. How can they help as well? So let's go for the female side first.
So I think one of the most important things is understand the changes. So education, knowledge is power. And as soon as you have an awareness of a change, you have the ability to make very small micro behavioral changes, which have a remarkable impact. So as you said, you're not living in a bubble in isolation, thankfully anymore. We're living in the real world with lots of interaction, stress, all these other factors have parts to play. But how you show up and how you understand the relationship between your internal and your external is very powerful. So obviously that's why we created a technology which gives you a daily insight and understanding of how these changes are impacting you. So that's one component. Knowledge is power. The second is really to do with nutritional kind of benefits. So one of the things that's really important to understand around the changes in progesterone, estrogen, is how they impact on other bodily functions. So, for example, your rising kind of progesterone and your changes post-ovulation mean that your liver and kidneys, for example, are under more pressure because they're having to detoxify these incredible hormones that create ovulation and create potentially life and all these other magical things.
Yeah.
That detoxification process means that your liver and your kidneys, for example, are under more pressure to remove those hormones from your system pre or post-bleed. Now, what that means, alcohol consumption. You're likely to get more drunk at certain points of the month. If you drink wine in one stage of the cycle versus another, you will feel the effects in a different way. Stimulants like coffee and sugar, you have direct impacts and changes on how your body can actually process and manage those stimulants at different points of the month. So, this is really reductive. Again, I'm trying to be super layman terms about this.
Of course, let's start simple and we'll get into the
But
nuances.
when you get to the point of that fourth phase of your cycle, if you are somebody who experiences chronic emotional, physical, or even physical symptoms like the bloating, the pain, the cramps, not in your bleed, but the week before, just make small changes. Make changes around not drinking alcohol at that point in the month, trying to avoid stimulant foods like sugar and coffee. Having the ability to also focus on that week around mental health practices. You don't have to go to the gym and work out, but just having really, really simple daily solutions like meditation or a breathwork practice that help you keep your body regulated when you don't have that power up experience. So we've learnt around this idea of wellness for the everyday to try and win every day at keeping a habit of health and well-being. And actually what I say to people is if you can't create a habit which is that regulated, that's okay, but focus on your health and wellness around that 1 week before your bleed, because that's the week when your body needs the extra support. For women, actually, the extra support comes from the elevated chemicals that you're having. Your estrogen improves and your focus, your energy, it gives you the power up that you maybe need. Whereas that 1 week before, that's where you should focus your energy. So knowledge is power. Stimulants not in the week before, and also just understanding that mental health practices in that week before your bleed can completely transform your everyday and throughout the month. So it helps regulate and balance.
And that explains a lot. When people try new things, they go try a new type of class or they try meditation. They might try at the wrong time of their cycle and then kind of go, that didn't work for me. But maybe if they tried a different stage of their cycle, they would love it, right?
Yeah.
It's the same for trying things like coffee or matcha or anything like that, right? So that's super interesting. I think people really underplay the impact, the stage of your cycle has on everything you try and do in your life.
Absolutely.
So
and if you've ever read, a lot of these amazing books, things about habit forming behaviors, right? Hooked and all these incredible books around like what builds a healthy habit or a healthy relationship to something and builds out, a structure. And when I read them thinking, why are you not talking about female hormones in this? Because if you start something at the wrong stage of your cycle, your chances of seeing that habit through or that relationship with that health habit through are very, very low. Whereas if you start at a point where your intention and your relationship to that piece is better, you have much higher chance. So if you start that habit the week after your bleed, and a point when you're feeling your strongest and you're feeling your best, you're much more likely to see that through in the points where you feel more low, more vulnerable, less able to kind of really lean into that experience.
That makes so much sense. And people, because when you think about it, when you learn about hormones and cycles, it usually happens to be at school, right? When you're a teenager.
Yeah.
And there's always that, that playfulness around the subject, boys are giggling or maybe grossed out by periods, and girls are kind of like embarrassed about it. And then after that, you don't really talk about it. It's just kind of something you get on with life. But having this knowledge of knowing what to do, what happens in each cycle, things to try, when and not to try, it really gives you a lot of power, and it gives you a lot of understanding too. And I guess it would lower your stress hormones, because you know why things are happening at certain stages, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is a thing we really underestimate, again, around some of the powers of technology, is this kind of understanding of self. If rather than someone else understanding you and using your data to tell you things about yourself, this is literally the inversion of that. It's how do we help you understand the pattern recognition of how this data and this information can give you reduced stress, improved mood, and a better relationship to understanding health habits, the why behind wellness. And you touched on it earlier, actually, around relationships and people. This, education that we get, which is really clunky and focused on sex and focused on all the things that when you're a teenager or even younger than that, you think, I don't want to talk about this. Actually, this isn't about that. This is about your brain. This is about how you can be the happiest version, the best version of yourself as frequently as possible. Consistent happiness is not a reality, but understanding that there is chemicals that affect your happiness, that is a powerful asset for the human experience. For sure.
And even with my boys, I have two boys, 9 and 16. We talk to them since they're young about periods, about women's cycles. And it's important to start that education early, right? Not just wait for the school system to teach you, and for you to read it in books, but start it in the household as well. Okay, now men, get your pens out again. This is for the men's side now. How can men support, or women support, their partners during these different stages of the cycle? What should the partner be doing to help the lady woman, going through these different stages? What is the most optimal time to be caring, nurturing, the most optimal time to initiate intimacy? What advice do you have there?
So I think the first piece is, again, understanding that there are changes that happen that affect your emotional sensitivity, that affect your mood, and obviously that can create tension and friction. And the chances of an argument, for example, the week before your bleed, when you're feeling more sensitive,
super high.
Even advocating for yourself because you don't have the right words, you can't draw from the memory centers properly. So I think the most important thing is understand when in the month your partner is going to be feeling the most sensitive. And that comes down to the baseline of empathy in any relationship. No person is perfect, and every person has different ways in which they're going to communicate. But if you can understand that, you can understand how to support and give your best support. So there's an amazing interview actually with Brené Brown, who is the kind of mother of all emotional intelligence communication. And one of the things that she talks about is this idea of showing up in a relationship at like 50% or 40%, and then communicating this percentage of how much energy you have. Now, the chances are that if you have a female partner, they are going to be showing up at 40% in that week. So you don't even need to explain to your partner that you're showing up with this much energy this week, because they already know. And if they are really struggling that week as well, because not everyone is having a great week at the exact point where you need support, then at least that person knows, okay, I'm going to just be a bit more aware, I'm going to be a bit more conscious, I'm going to try to just give that person a little bit more consideration in that week.
So this gets into the next topic, which is around communication. How do you communicate this at home, in your relationships? So this percentage concept is interesting. You can just say that day, look, I'm at a 30% today. It's a bit subjective though, and it can change throughout the day as well, depending on how things go on. What's another way to communicate how you're feeling, how you can be supported that day or that week? I know that your app has this really cool thing on Sundays. It sends like a forecast for the week.
Absolutely. So
that both sides know what to do. That's super cool.
Exactly. Yeah. So we realized, so my whole thing at the beginning of building Moody was, this is not about your partner, this is about you. I was very, very like clear on this. This is about you understanding body literacy and the emotional changes that are happening for you. How can I know today, like with the weather, how this is going to be impacting, and how can I therefore be optimized around my everyday health? Then, as we got into this, we realized you are not a bubble. We live in society, we live in social environments. And this isn't just about romantic partners. This is also about other people in your life where you're living in close proximity. It could be housemates. It could be, people you're working with even. We found that people are sharing it with their, their colleagues.
Wow. I'm going to ask you about this later.
Yeah, we have this this Sunday email that you get, which is your week ahead. So it's almost like a how to plan and understand how your hormones are going to be impacting on your week. And that is the thing you can forward share with anyone, right? It's not syncing up with another app. It's a very simple but very easy newsletter about yourself that you can use to help communicate better with everyone.
Like a weather forecast with tips.
Exactly.
Basically. It's going to rain on Tuesday, so have an umbrella. Yeah. Wednesday is going to be fine. Get your bikini out.
And we thought of all these kind of inventive ways. We've thought of all these inventive ways to be able to integrate, partner synchronization, like what are all these different elements? We found that actually the thing that landed for us as users and experience and consumers, but also for all of our users that we were trialing this with, was just tell me the week before it's going to be hard. And then this as an email format is the most effective solution. It's a very powerful communication tool, but it's one of the biggest pieces of feedback we get is people that have been on the brink of divorce. We've had letters about this, like not just one, a few, where people have really found no way through, and then suddenly realizing that there's a pattern to when these very extreme misalignments are happening. And this recognition, this light bulb moment of this is happening every month. And for me, that feels very frequent and very problematic. But this is happening because of my emotional instability and my emotional health being fractured at this point.
Yeah.
And that change in the ability for their partner to empathize with something that is not necessarily out of your control, because everything is manageable within your health, but is something that's happening that is part of your body and your brain. That it changes the game.
Yeah. I've had a number of friends. I've gone through experiences myself where things just don't seem right. They keep clashing, but it could be because you're talking about the wrong topics in the wrong times. Exactly. And having an understanding of when to have difficult conversations is a skill in itself. But if it's backed by data, by understanding how your cycles are going, I think that's super useful. And I think that could definitely save a lot of relationships.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and so for the different stages, so we're talking about communication, how couples can talk to each other. So we've got the percentage communication style. Yeah. We've got the newsletter through the app. Any other ways you think which are useful to communicate in relationships?
Well, I think when we're also, let me articulate this in the way that I think is best. It comes back to empathy, right? Emotional intelligence and empathy are the most critical foundations for any way of communicating and listening, active listening. So one of the things that's quite hard to understand when you're in the fog of this kind of week is that things will change. It's hard to listen because you're so focused on all this other stimulation that's happening around you. And so parking a conversation or parking something to move it to the next week. So one of the strategies that has come with people's, I guess, using the app, using the science as a productivity tool is how to pause a moment and park a conversation and re-examine that the week later. And it's not just because it gives you a breather, it gives you time to kind of reset. It's also your experience and your understanding from a female experience and understanding perspective is going to be completely different 5 days later based on the relationship your potential hormones are having. Now, you might come to exactly the same conclusion. You might come to exactly the same point. So let's take, rather than a relationship example, let's take a work example. I want to quit my job. I want to change something in my job. You believe in that week you're going to quit today. This is 100% the day you're going to do it. it's just that conversation with yourself, just making sure you replicate the exact environment and having that conversation with yourself a week later and see if the variables change. Because the chances are that there's some factors that you think, okay, I'm going to actually structure this in a different way. Because your body is so much more impulsive and reactive to the fact that it doesn't have any of the other mediating factors around it. So in work, in life, this ability to reevaluate the same conversation but in a different phase of your cycle is, again, game changer for more informed decision making, better productivity, clearer thoughts, and just a really easy way to create a better function for your kind of life work.
And through the whole time, we've been talking mostly about data and knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And this is, after all, a podcast about AI.
Yeah.
So we'll get into a little bit how AI can help, but we'll segue into that naturally. But the whole time we're talking about data and knowledge, which is the backbone of any AI solution and how AI can help you. At different stages of a cycle, woman's cycle, what supplements and vitamins are key for a woman to take? I know it can depend maybe on deficiencies. Some people have different deficiencies on vitamin B and etc. But generally, what are the best vitamins to take at different stages?
So there are two key vitamins that I think are very helpful and kind of quality is one thing, obviously, but that kind of help generally within hormone health balance. Omega-3. So when you're pregnant, people talk about this a lot. It's like all the research shows it's literally a superpower for your baby's brain development. And the difference between babies born where women are taking omega-3 and not, you can see the developmental brain kind of changes. So omega-3, when we think about brain health within the cycle experience, much like liver, kidneys, your brain changes across the cycle. And so supporting memory, focus, brain health and taking omega-3 is very powerful, but particularly around the changes, what you'll feel the difference is in that luteal phase, in that week before your bleed.
And just to interject, I had to learn this myself as well. So omega-3 is the supplement vitamin that has the most scientific proof to benefit the human body, more than vitamin C, zinc, and any other type of mineral or vitamin you can take. Because there's always arguments around, do vitamins actually help you? Because they get basically washed away in your urine and in your stools. So, what's the point in actually taking them? But omega-3 is one of the only ones that pretty much every scientist agrees it's really great for you to take.
Which is why I talk about it, because it's it's hard when the research is trying to catch up with where we're at as human beings and as a society. But where I lean into is where there is real proof and hard evidence to be able to demonstrate that something has a markable impact. And again, this is why I talk about quality. It's a supplement that we know helps with inflammation. It helps your body, and when your cycle has a huge impact on inflammation. Same when we're talking about other cycles like perimenopause as well. When you're dealing with inflammation in the body, it's hard to identify exactly when it's happening, but where you can support with other kind of supplementation. So
which other ones? Magnesium I think is quite
which
important.
Is the other one which I was just about to mention. So when you're dealing again with stress, you're dealing with the ability to kind of support kind of inflammatory experiences in the body. Magnesium, particularly in that fourth phase. Magnesium is something you can take and have quite an immediate response to. So if you, rather than take magnesium every day, if you just take magnesium in that fourth phase of your cycle to help your body with relaxation and support of kind of all the other systems. So and also evidence-based. So
lots of evidence on magnesium.
Huge amounts of evidence around omega-3 and huge amounts of evidence around magnesium.
And also for things like sleeping. A lot of people take Valium or some of these stronger medicines for sleeping. But magnesium before bed actually helps you sleep really, really well. Yeah,
which is also why taking magnesium at different points of the cycle and understanding dosage is powerful, because it can make you drowsy. If you take magnesium, high dose of magnesium in the morning to help level your body, you can feel drowsy all day. It can actually have the counter effect. So every person is slightly different, but understanding that fourth phase, when your body needs more rest, more recovery, but also bleed as well. So if you struggle with sleep, for example, if you can support your body during bleed, where your sleep is the most intense and the best that it can be, take magnesium at that point. The third thing that I would always recommend to anybody is supplementation, but also hydration.
Yeah.
So we forget that our bodies are primarily water. And for female like bodies, you have this change in your hydration and your body's ability. So when I talked about alcohol consumption, I talked about, stimulant foods. When we're also thinking about that fourth phase, the luteal phase, your body is going to be more dehydrated. And if we're talking about something like perimenopause, for example, one of the big challenges that people experience with elevated symptoms is that your body is actually having to process out all these additional chemicals and these changes. So hydrating your body means you have more filtration, you have better ways. I'm trying to use layman terms to make sure it's super easy because this is the only way to explain this. Your body is going to process better all the additional stress and stimulant like hormones that you have in your body. So hydration, yes, just drinking more water isn't necessarily always just the answer, because if you just drink copious amounts of water, your body is very effective about getting rid of it. So peeing it out. Elevating your water and adding nutrient benefit to your water can be supportive. So things like magnesiums, but also using and understanding different ways in which you can add antioxidants to your water. So adding like antioxidant fruits or
so
antioxidant
like berries
powders
of some sort, or
because antioxidants are one of the major ways in which your body can help with like cell rehabilitation and detoxification. So there's a few ways you can do antioxidants, obviously through nutrition and nutrition, but there's also some really great, formulas on the market where you can have high antioxidant formulas in powder forms or in tablets as well. So
and they're safe to take, you think?
So there's one formula which is in a few different products called Oxenea, which is really interesting, but it's new. It's a new thing that's happening in the market now. I think the evolution of that market in itself is going to be huge because it's such an effective and very immediate response. But when you look at hydration products, for example, the challenge which is why I don't recommend always hydration products, is they can be full of quite like bad chemicals, because they're designed for sport, right? They're designed for
electrolytes, salts.
So electrolytes are great, so salts and electrolytes are great, but it's choosing certain hydration products that are not just designed for extreme athletes running, because those are also almost like drinking Lucozade. It's great if you're running a marathon, but drinking Lucozade every day, it's like
if you're sitting on a desk, it's probably a bad
or just
idea.
doing a spin class. But electrolytes, magnesium, antioxidants in water, very, very powerful.
What are the biggest mistakes you've seen women make in regards to their health? That's kind of cause them to go to hospital, have serious problems in their relationships and their work-life balance. What are the most common mistakes you see? What the key ones that you've seen which are catastrophic?
I think that's a really good question. So I think one of the major things does come back to awareness and advocating for yourself. So one of the problems of us dismissing our health, and particularly for women, because you have been told when it comes to hormonal health, when it comes to periods, you just get on with it. Just deal with it. It's just part of a cycle. No. Pain, you should not be having chronic pain every single month. It's a sign of something being wrong. Pain is there to tell you that your body is not working effectively.
It's a warning sign.
So endometriosis, talking about conditions which are related to hormonal fluctuations, PMDD, which is onset depression that happens for women every month. These are conditions where, because of the way society has dismissed the female experience, women don't go soon enough to seek help, and so live with chronic pain or chronic depression, which is connected to a monthly cycle, for years. And this is problematic because it creates trauma in the body. It creates other knock-on effects alongside that condition, and it disadvantages women in every facet of life.
It does,
So I'm going to talk quickly about PMDD because I think it's really interesting. So PMDD is clinical depression that happens because of the change in estrogen progesterone. It was only recognized by the World Health Organization as a condition in 2019. So we're dealing with something which has been misdiagnosed as bipolar, as depression, and therefore mismedicated for, forever. And it can affect 1 in 20 women. And so you have this kind of challenge now where we're dealing with things which we're starting to understand as a society, but also the difference between medicating. So if you think about medicating depression, you're medicating a chemical imbalance that is happening on a daily basis and is happening consistently. That's not PMDD. PMDD is happening at a very specific point every month. Now, it can create suicide. Like suicide is one of the kind of issues, right? You're dealing with suicidal thoughts, which can come with depression. So understanding the way that medication can be distributed, dosed, connected to cycle. You don't need to medicate for PMDD throughout the whole month necessarily, but you do need to understand, one, when it's happening, the extreme level at which it's happening, and therefore hopefully the future is personalized medicine, right? Is that we can personalize that medicine and that dosage. But just in the interim, just understanding those phases and when to give someone the right medication at the right point.
And just for everybody's benefit, how does this differ from postpartum depression?
Postpartum depression is something that happens post a baby being born, right? So PMDD is something that is happening on a menstruation cycle every single month. Postpartum depression is a change in your chemical balance, which is again linked to kind of estrogen progesterone balance, but it can happen at different points. But it is a depression, which again is under-researched and a very huge gap in terms of the medical intervention in space. But again, advocating for yourself, understanding that post-birth, the conversation is happening now where women are given a lot more information about what to watch out for. It is not okay to be having suicidal thoughts, fear thoughts, lack of sleep, all these other kind of symptoms of a condition which is linked to this point post-birth. But also postpartum depression can happen not just in the first 3 months of post-birth. It can happen anytime within the first 2 years.
Yeah.
2 years, and
it's probably misdiagnosed quite often as well.
It's really hard to diagnose because you need somebody to identify it themselves.
Yeah.
A doctor in the UK, for example, the intervention is great in terms of the way midwives now are trained and actually identifying much quicker this experience because you have so much more support. But unless you have someone who's with you regularly, it's also very difficult to identify it in yourself. We dismiss ourselves more regularly and more often than we do think something's wrong and I need to seek help. Your partner in that situation is super important because they will be somebody who can say, you're not seeming yourself. And it comes back to this ability for somebody to feel confident to say, hormones might be at play here. We need to go and seek some help, because advocating for yourself when you are in the depths of a depression is near on impossible to do.
Yeah. And this is the tough part about depression. And by the way, we need to make sure people don't understand this is a depressing topic, ironically. This is very important because likely it must be something like 1 in 5 women will go through both of these conditions that we mentioned, right? It's quite common.
Yeah.
And the difficult thing about anything related to depression because of hormonal imbalance is that when you're depressed, you don't care.
Yeah.
Right? You don't care about seeking help. You have suicidal thoughts. You kind of want to leave the situation. So it's very much dependent on someone else picking up on it and coming forward and being educated enough to know what it is instead of criticizing that person further, tell them to just get on with it and pushing them through it, which can cause a lot of PTSD type issues later on, right?
And it breaks your relationship because you don't have empathy. So we come back to this core pillar of what is communication. Communication is about empathy and understanding so that you can actively listen and actively understand.
Yeah. With Simon Squibb, the episode just before yours, we were talking a lot about compassion, empathy, just, being a little bit easier on people. And a lot of times when you feel like you need to make a decision on the spot because that situation seems so urgent, you're very right. Look at the cycle that you're in, look at the stage that you're in and think, is this really the best time for me to make this decision? Do I have to make the decision now? Can I not make it next week? Maybe I'm in a better mind space to think about this topic.
Yeah.
So it's a topic that's underplayed. I mean, do you think ever there'll be a day when employers will give women a day off when they're going through their menstrual cycle at certain stages? Are we ever going to get to a point where there is a compassion at the employer level?
Okay. This is a very complicated and very loaded topic.
And why should they as well?
Exactly. So, this is about advocating for yourself. What do you need and why do you need it? I think that it's probably a podcast in itself, right? A whole conversation around like workplace experiences, mental health, like how to understand as an employer, as an employee. If we were to take this back to, if you know that you are someone who suffers from PMDD, or you are someone who suffers from endometriosis or PCOS, you are within a category where this is a condition which is going to affect your productivity, your workplace experience, and your ability to function. You should be in control of the ability to communicate that. The challenge we have is we are given more information, but employers and the world generally doesn't have yet the empathy or the understanding to address this appropriately. We see it with maternity, we see it with all these other situations. I'd love the world to be more advanced, and I'd love for us to be talking in a utopia of, you tell your workplace that this is something you're experiencing and they adapt your sick pay and your holiday to effectively be, aligned to your specific experience, which hopefully in our utopian future of understanding, that's where we get to. Right now, you just need to have more compassion for yourself to know that if you need to take one day every single month because of a condition, you are going to need to understand when that's happening. You need to pre-plan. You need to be aware of how that might impact and at what points you think, okay, can I work from home? Mm-hmm. It might even determine what type of work you choose. Do you choose a hybrid role where you can work from home and you can actually adapt your productivity around this experience? Which leads me to this next stage of why more flexible working, more hybrid models. When we think about female advocacy for health, these models serve to a better experience for women in the workplace, because these conversations in a very structured, you turn up to the office, you perform every day exactly as you were performing before, don't serve for a female experience. I don't arguably think they serve for a male experience, but probably another podcast there as well. Yeah. But that's why more understanding about self, choices around how you work, choosing roles that have more hybrid kind of flexible kind of working practices, because it doesn't mean you can't deliver. It just means you can probably deliver at more specific points every single month.
Makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's a lot of conversations around 4-day work weeks, and the companies that take mental health days and they celebrate it, but they don't go to the next stage, which is implementing techniques where if somebody's not feeling their best, not because they have a headache, a migraine, or anything else, but they're just not feeling right. They're not feeling like they can make the best decisions on that particular day because they potentially have a hormonal imbalance. There should be an option to kind of take a day off, more flexibly around. But
then I actually get asked this question a lot. Like, if we were to build a working world with women in mind rather than with men in mind, because the working world was designed for men, right? It wasn't designed for women because women didn't work for a long time, if we look at history. So you then think about, okay, well, actually, rather than redesign the same model for women, that's the wrong question to ask. It's, what are the things that we need to understand? And that's why this hybrid experience, because you can't just then design it for women and not for men. If we're going to have male-female experience interacting in work, it makes so much sense to have this kind of hybrid experience of some days in the office, some days working from home. How do we create compromise in that environment? So yeah, the idea of a future world where you can take a day off is for everyone. That's because mental health is impacting at different points. But it's not about this being connected to menstruation or menopause or a specific health condition. It's also related to just when you need a mental health day, male or female, how do we create workplace environments that actually allow for that to be maybe part of the environment anyway, and create confidence in advocating for yourself in that.
And I think if a lot of employers did that, they would create, employees that are a lot more loyal, because they realize that they care about their mental health and well-being as well.
But it's productivity, right? Fundamentally, what any business comes down to is people and productivity. And if you can't get the best from your people because you're not understanding the way that their brain and their body works, then you're not going to have an effective output. So again, it comes down to data, right? You know, you look at the best models for any business, and it is, how do you optimize for the human experience in any working environment to get the best output?
I'm a huge advocate of going beyond just, you know, having teams and having people and trying to manage them a little better. You know, companies should ask people to take psychology tests and personality tests, and if they can hook up to their kind of hormonal profiles and things like this, imagine how well you would know your employees, right?
I know,
how well they could work together.
But it comes back to this point where our utopia is that all the managers hosting, creating those businesses have the empathy to interpret that data in the right way. Mm-hmm. The problem is that still society has a systematic judgment of this person has this mental health condition versus this person. I'm going to lean into this person because they're probably easier for me to manage. Yeah. So we have to start to understand the benefit of those, the benefit of the downside, right? And the thing about, let's just take like the female experience. What's proven is that we know women are, post having kids, for example, the ability to have busy people who can do lots of things at the same time. We know that, but we haven't aligned the working experience and the education around working mothers with that as a superpower. Yeah. It's still not aligning. It's not aligning in politics and in legislation. It's not aligning in workplace. Yeah. And so we can build that technology today. We could build that technology to evaluate your superpower and provide a customized working experience. But we have to get the education of employers and structures right before we can deploy that, so that it doesn't become manipulative and self-selecting of probably certain types of men who have not had maybe more negative experiences or more stress or more health conditions. So it's really a balance.
I actually dream of a future like this, where employers they actually make the investment into caring about their people, instead of just saying our people are the most important, most invaluable thing that we have. Yeah. You know, put money where your mouth is and actually invest into these technologies, actually go a step further and actually care a little bit more. Yeah.
But the proof will come with the economic use cases, right? So we're still in this stage where you see the biggest success stories. Okay, I always use the example of the ping pong table, right? And the Google, Facebook. The reason people put ping pong tables and beer on tap in every office across the land was because billion-dollar businesses were creating meals and creating these cool, almost like uni kind of frat house style environments. We've moved on, thankfully, from that, because that was for 20-year-olds building tech and it doesn't apply to every industry. But it's demonstrated that as soon as you show you can build $1 billion business from creating a empathetic working environment like this, the culture follows. You have to have the economic business case, because at the moment people don't believe and can't see the economic use case of leaning into that mental health conversation. Yeah. And so I really believe that one of the things that we want as part of the output of Moody is not just build this technology to prove that the optimization of self is great, but if you build $1 billion business with these empathetic principles at the core, you can then create a blueprint also for how people build technologies in the future, which does create this more utopian output. So there's a few things in the pipeline that we want to get to with this.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
One thing that we did skip a little bit, and this is very important, and I don't want to, intimacy is a big part of relationships. Mm-hmm. And not just sex. It's something a lot of, I think, people get wrong about men that just care about sex. Men care about intimacy. They really do. Sex is part of intimacy. At different stages of a woman's cycle, how does her libido change? Mm-hmm. This is more for the men audience and people that date women. How does her libido change throughout different stages? And when is the best time to initiate intimacy and sex as part of intimacy?
So again, we come back to these the 4 phases and understanding the relationship. Now, I caveat this by every person's experience is different. And what we do know is stress, certainly for women, has a huge impact on libido.
Yeah.
So taking into consideration your partner's stress and the environmental stress that they have going on is probably the first base for all people to understand intimacy
so
and
first checkpoint, are they stressed?
Are they stressed?
Have they been
and
stressed
how
last
do you
couple of
reduce
days?
their stress to create intimacy? It's why romance is not dead. That has not been removed. We need that to be able to create intimacy, and why female experience takes longer, because your body has to literally calm, reduce stress to be able to kind of engage with the kind of baselines of what start desire. So
and that's why they also say, I guess, that women initiate intimacy in the brain first.
Absolutely.
And then
so
the body follows.
Arguably so do men. As we know, erectile dysfunction is also directly linked to stress. So it's all interconnected to brain. It's just that I think that, from a female experience, you have certainly a kind of, emotional, physical, sensorial experience which helps stimulate desire.
So first checkpoint is common sense.
Common sense.
Most of these things. Is she stressed out or not? And can I help?
Everything comes down to this. What is the commonsensical reality of this situation? Yeah. So common sense.
So common sense is the first one.
Second is cycle.
The science, a little bit more scientific.
The science relationship. So when you think about, interestingly, people talk about bleed and the kind of understanding of like period sex, but actually most women, again, every person is slightly different, towards like within their bleed can start to feel like sexual desire in a much like deeper way than the week before, because although your hormones at the beginning of your bleed are lower, your sensitivity and your rising estrogen start to make you feel stronger, and actually your physical sensitivity is again like kind of starting to feel stronger, starting to feel better. So that rising estrogen before ovulation is when women tend to feel stronger, more outward, they're more advocating for themselves, they know exactly kind of what they want when they want it, in a generalized experience. And within that kind of ovulation phase, because your body, if you take it back to kind of primal, right, your body is about understanding how to attract a mate in that point. That's what the function of that kind of system is there for. So if you imagine that ovulation phase, that is when you feel sexiest, that's when you feel great, that's when you want to kind of draw your partner in.
So the start of the second week post your menstrual cycle finishing.
Exactly.
More or less.
So bleed, your desire will start to kind of rise, but also confidence. And so you have this kind of point in ovulation where you're like, I feel great, I really want this. It's where you're kind of feeling your best. And interestingly, that's obviously where you look, it changes how you look. So if you can take photographs of yourself as a woman in each phase of your cycle, you will notice slight marginal differences in how, because you see the tiny details in how you look. So I always say to people, if you really want to understand your phases, photograph yourself in the 4 phases and just see the 4 personalities that you see in yourself. So ovulation, attracting a mate, you're going to want to have sex, your desire is higher, but in and around that whole ovulatory phase is when you're kind of peaking. Now, there is also a shift in your hormone levels post-ovulation where there's 2 distinct factors here. You probably don't feel as sexy and confident and advocating for yourself, but when your pain thresholds are much higher, as in you're kind of physically more sensitive, you have actually a lot more sensitivity to sex. So your people have, in studies as well, shown that, you might be able to orgasm quicker in the 4th phase of your cycle because your sensitivity around that kind of experience is higher. However, you're not feeling your best, you're not feeling your sexiest, you're not feeling your most confident.
I think the week before the menstrual cycle starts, it's kind of approach with caution.
It's also understanding how to talk about it, right? Yeah. So if you know that a week before you were feeling super sexy, super great, in your strength, and then a week later you feel much more reserved, much more anxious, much more kind of insular, your body also changes, so your weight changes physically as well. And yeah, generally just being able to kind of take it a bit more slow, but also maybe that's the week that you don't want to have sex, and that's also okay. And being able to communicate that with your partner.
And that's why I mentioned intimacy, right? Because there's many forms of intimacy. Sex is one of them. Of course, you can spend a lovely romantic evening together, talking, Sex is only one part of it.
Yeah.
And when it comes to communicating that, and when it comes to women that have really irregular cycles, because I don't want to generalize that every woman has great, regular cycles. I've heard different statistics that, 40% of women have irregular cycles, right? I don't know what the number is. Do you know what it is?
The statistics change, but it's high. And I would say 40% is probably, and I would say 40% is probably the closest consistent statistic that I see. Yeah. I think with that irregularity, it can happen at different stages of life as well, right? So we have, you could have regular cycles and then suddenly irregular cycles. Stress has a huge component to play in that, but also changes in lifestyle, perimenopause. So
we'll
almost
get into
everyone,
that in a second. I really want to get into that. Yeah.
Almost everyone will go through irregular cycles and ending cycles, or everyone will go through that at some point. So irregular cycles means that understanding this kind of nuanced experience is even more important, because when you start to understand your cycle might not be a monthly cycle, but is there pattern recognition? Again, where technology and data can come into play. You might be able to see that there's a seasonal effect. The weather might change the way in which your cycles regulate or deregulate. You might be able to see that actually, are you freelance, and when you're working on like high intensity projects and the stress impacts, are there external and internal correlations that you can start to relate to this irregularity? But even if it's just that you're irregular and there's not an environmental factor around regularity, but there is around mental health implications, you might just see, okay, my cycles are not regular, but I am having mental physical correlations at certain points. So just journaling, logging. One of the major features within the app that we have built into this is how to journal what you're experiencing and then have that sent back to you as a reflection at the end of a cycle or the end of each month if your cycles are irregular. So irregular cycles is not necessarily anything abnormal, but identifying your mental physical health patterns within a format or a tracking experience will help you just understand the patterns that are relevant for you. It's about pattern recognition of mental physical health changes.
And it's really important, I thought, to bring this up, because if 40% of women are having irregular cycles, they must bring up their stress quite a bit, and also must bring a lot of stress to their relationships as well. Because this kind of pattern that we mentioned about women's libido and how it changes over each stage of the cycle is great for women to have regular periods. But then, if it doesn't, then that can bring a lot of stress to the relationship. The man feels like he just doesn't understand what's going on, and the woman going through that as well. So it's super important. What are the kind of things that, apart from stress, what are the other things that kind of bring irregular cycles? Can we talk a little bit about PCOS and things like that?
So PCOS, I think also I've talked a lot about kind of the science and the science of hormones with the context of my own experience in this, right? So I am not a doctor. I do not have a PhD. I have built a business which gave me huge insight and access to networks of doctors and networks of experts. So what was interesting about that is I've become this kind of ultimate researcher. I did write a book which about this, which is the kind of almost the layman experience of understanding the inside knowledge of how hormones affect your mental health. So I did put this into words, but this kind of experience of understanding, there are lots of experts, but experts are very fractional. So you have experts in PCOS, in endocrinologists, for example, who are experts in hormones. You then have neuroscientists. You have everyone from an academic perspective, fractional across all their expertise. What's been interesting is to kind of zoom out and look at the lens of, well, what are the connections between all those different expertise and try to draw parallels. So irregular cycles is one which is across almost every single one of those factors, but the consistent reality is it's more often a sign that something's not quite right. And so understanding it as potentially a symptom and then identifying and advocating for that. And one of the consistent kind of challenges is polycystic ovary syndrome, so PCOS, and endometriosis. So two conditions that are related directly to hormone imbalance, and irregular cycles and painful, in endometriosis the case certainly is painful cycles is linked to that. So when you're thinking about understanding a symptom or something that's related to a condition, being able to understand what are the baselines. So, her changes skin. So another one with PCOS is acne. And often the solution is the contraceptive. So a lot of doctors will prescribe contraceptive. It doesn't solve PCOS. It masks, and therefore the longer you're on the contraceptive, the longer that is going to be going on for, and potentially more extreme the outcome. So I think it's fine. And obviously if you have chronic acne, which is one of the symptoms of PCOS, it's debilitating. It's hugely impacting on your mental, physical health. It impacts on your mental health. So having
plus PCOS, kind of you have higher testosterone than normal.
High testosterone, which is why facial hair is another.
I was about to mention that facial hair, hair in general, becomes an issue really.
And it's one of the things which, again, we've built a society where the key symptoms of PCOS, for example, are all almost anti-society: facial hair, acne. Weight gain in certain areas, and irregular cycles and irregular moods. You're essentially like othered as a female experience. So the contraceptive, again, a whole podcast on kind of that, but it's a great short-term fix for a deeper understanding is needed. Now, the challenge with a lot of these conditions is they only really have had research in the last 10, 15 years. There are no single pill fixes. The interventions that have been proven to work mostly are very extreme. So in case of things like endometriosis, you're talking hysterectomies, you're talking very extreme interventions at extreme ends of the spectrum. But there are brilliant interventions from a nutrition and a lifestyle perspective, so that can help. So again, things like removing stimulant foods or foods that can imbalance hormones, things like coffee, sugar, seeking specific support, nutritional support for your needs. But what we do know is that nutrition, lifestyle changes have a remarkable impact on the negative outcomes and the negative symptoms associated to these conditions.
One thing I wanted to ask you is more of I guess it's a funny question, but something that I've always wondered. And I've had explanations before, but maybe you can explain it better. Why is it when women live together, their cycles tend to sync up?
Yeah.
And I have friends that have 2 or 3 girls and plus their wife, and they all kind of tend to sync up at the same time. And also at university, I remember some of the dorms used to be only girls, and they used to all sync at the same time as well. It's super interesting.
Yeah. So if you Google this, right, in terms of cycle syncing research, it will tell you unproven, not a proven fact. Now, if you qualitatively ask any woman, have you ever cycle synced in a group of women? They will say, yes, I have. So in my mind, and again, we need more research into female health. So anywhere where it says unproven, I would caveat with needs more research. The biological baselines for this come back to originally, when way back we were in groups and men were trying to fertilize as many women as possible. Trying to use the right language in this, but there isn't the right language. So you were living in groups where if women's bodies were synchronized, because there was fertility windows where it was optimal for fertilization, and there's pheromones, there's ways, there's reasons why women's bodies synchronize, and there's also a neurological reality, there's an empathy reality. Now, coming back to the modern day, what we're thinking about there is, I would argue there's probably as much need for neuro investigation into this, in terms of understanding the empathy cycles that women have with each other that automatically align their bodies, than there is just around the endocrine kind of chemical function. Because I think that when you look at the science and what does exist around kind of bodies and how people regulate, is that we regulate in packs, we regulate with people, we regulate with our kin, with our friends, with our family, and that alignment therefore indicates probably more that you are in a family unit, in a family connection, and have very good bonds with those people. And so the synchronization piece is to do with empathy again, probably biological baselines from way back in the day. And
so way back in the day, let's go back to that 1 second. Are you talking about kind of the body sinking because men would go hunting.
Yeah,
go out
I'm
for
talking
weeks.
hunter-gatherer back in
Men would
the
go
kind
to
of
war, and so it's you really think it was like a psychological
so
reason
there's
for
an
it?
amazing
Super interesting.
amazing woman called Dr. Tara Swart. So she wrote a book called The Source, which is about the kind of the mysticism and neuroscience of, it's actually to do with manifestation, but she's now done a lot of work and a lot of research and kind of worked in this space around what are the functions of our body which lead us to better understanding around these kind of societal systems and societal changes. So she actually talked about this in another podcast, which a very famous podcast. Shall I mention which one?
Of course, yeah. We share. We love
Diary
sharing.
of a CEO. So
gotcha.
like the I think it's one of his most listened to episodes actually, and she talks about this exact thing, which is why in the kind of primal baselines of our body, cycle synchronization happened. And I think it's really interesting because we forget that our bodies are function as much as they are for this modern day society. We have functions that have been designed not to live in an overstimulated, highly stimulated environment. And when we actually come back to those functions and how our body actually works, it gives us a lot more empathy for then thinking about, okay, well, how do we then work with that in a new modern context rather than continually fighting against the grain? So yeah, her interview gives a lot more kind of scientific context to this.
Gotcha.
But coming back to just the hunter-gatherer experience, we were designed to live in tribes, right? Tribes of people who were synchronizing with different roles and different functions. And it was very practical in those tribes for women to menstruate together because of like the kind of functions of all of those different elements. So when you then look at those correlations, again, it's not proven, it's not fact. There's some common sense and there's some logic to then understanding why these things happen in a modern era for our bodies.
This may sound ridiculous, and maybe I'll get killed in the comments and later on when we put this out, but I have my own theory in relation to syncing, cycle syncing.
Yeah.
So when my wife was pregnant with our boy Oliver, she used to feel sick. There were times she would feel nausea, dizzy, all kinds of things. And I spent a lot of time with her on purpose because I wanted to make it a good experience.
Yeah.
And I used to have the same symptoms as she was having.
Yeah.
So sometimes she was feeling dizzy. I started to feel dizzy. And she wouldn't even tell me. Sometimes I would tell her, I'm feeling really dizzy. Are you feeling dizzy? And she's like, yeah, I am. So is there a role that pheromones play in this?
For sure.
The pheromones that women give out, men give out, the body picks it up. It kind of sinks through that.
So the more common one actually with pregnancy, which my husband talks about a lot, which I am very interested in, is weight gain. So that men
exactly
gain weight during pregnancy. Now, some people put that down to changes in diet and eating habits, but I think there's also just a kind of ability for your bodies, if you are connected and in that kind of partnership, you are very, very close, you have an exchange of empathy. Your bodies are responding to each other because there is chemical exchange. And it's the same when we think about stress, right? So we know, and what has been proven is that stress emulates from the body, and you don't have to necessarily, we see this with kids, right? Kids don't have to, you don't have to tell them you're stressed. They know, and they respond in different ways. You see when children respond to you when you're stressed versus when you're calm, and it's why creating calm environments, not always possible, helps with kids' mental health. But in partnerships, it's exactly the same for so many other things. And if a hormone like cortisol is excreted from the body and has an impact on everyone around you, not just children, but everyone around you, it would be very logical to think that other hormones, because your skin is your biggest organ and it excretes and it communicates with the world around you. It's why acne or spots are not something to be treated, they're to be something to understood. They're a symptom. Where spots appear on your face, for example, indicate different hormonal imbalances or indicate different things. So this idea of your body's ability to chemically communicate with the world around you is 100% true.
So maybe my theory is correct.
Your theory,
or it's along the right lines.
I would say your theory is correct in terms of the hormonal relationships. We don't know yet, and so your qualitative experience of I'm feeling these things should be validated, right?
Yeah.
We don't know which hormones are potentially causing that emotional response, but the foundation of it is correct. And the weight gain piece as well. I also think there's a stress that comes for men with an experience that they are not going through and they're trying to understand, which also we know stress slows your metabolism down. So I also think there's some interesting stuff which I promised, because when I was pregnant my husband gained a lot of weight, which is why this became a very core topic.
Yeah.
And he was obsessed with it. And so I promised him at some point we would research the relationship between what hormones are creating weight gain in men during pregnancy.
So let's get into the topic of AI now.
Yeah.
So what role does AI play in helping people understand cycles, hormones, improving their relationships? What kind of ways do you think AI has helped in those areas?
So, as you mentioned before, what we have been talking about is all data. And I've talked in very generalized terms, in kind of layman's terms, about the baselines of these things. But fundamentally, the reason an app is a vehicle to deploy this kind of technology is it's an interface which is in your phone and it's there all the time on a daily basis. And the important thing about AI in this is personalization and the ability for this to be relevant for you based on your data. So you can't do that in any other real form. And the reason, actually, interestingly, an app is it's very low bar, low intensity, easy. And as we know, men wear more wearables than women. You know, it's the gateway to this.
Yeah.
So from an AI perspective, understanding and being able to interpret data in a way which is not reported to you, but gives you insight around this passive data we have within our environment to help you on a daily basis make sense of it. Now, the future of this utopian vision of where technology can help people optimize is, rather than all this data, all this kind of information, which is this almost analog data form that we're in right now, it will be streamlined down to a single morning, evening insight, taking all this data into consideration externally, and AI will synthesize that information and say, this is what you might be feeling today, or this is what might be happening for you today. And therefore, these are the things you can do to optimize based on your specific profile, your specific experiences, and all these other components. The power of that is human optimization. As simple as that. So
it's, using AI to better understand your body through different sensors effectively, to then computate that and tell you, okay, this is what you should try to do today, tomorrow is a different day, etc.
Exactly, but it's also the macro and the micro, right? So not everyone is walking around connected to every wearable device and every synthesized environmental factor, but some people are. And so how do we create the averages and understanding? And the way AI can synthesize that information is you have all these extreme, all these different use cases of the technology, the external technology. And then you have the ability to turn that into a model which can apply to lots of different people. So we're in the stage of this technology at the moment where it's about data collation at scale across many different human experiences. And not everyone needs to be hyper synced up to reap the rewards of it. Because also, at the moment, this idea of we're all covered in all these technical devices, that's not how people want to exist. They want to exist by that technology, making it very simple. And really, the one thing we're all most likely going to be carrying around with us is our device in one form or another. And so it's really taking this, what I would call the analog AI era, into the real AI era, which is a hyper-synthesized experience which takes macro and micro experiences and makes it relevant for every individual to their body.
And you're talking about human optimization. I mean, if you have this kind of information, you try to go towards it in some way. I mean, it can even help you optimize when to make better deals.
Absolutely.
When to make better decisions, when to have the right types of foods. So it can make a huge difference to how you function, right?
Absolutely. But it's also this utopia you mentioned before about a workplace environment where people empathize. It starts with self, right? If you can understand that we are not trying to fit into a homogenized box of X who turns up every day and performs at exactly the same rate. We are not robots. Humans by design are nuanced to all these different emotional, physical experiences. So technology to not homogenize the human experience but elevate difference is where AI comes into place. But it's also gender disparity. So where we have created technologies in the past which lean into more of a male experience, coming right back to this idea of a running app, right? We designed running apps to help men run faster. We did not design running apps to help women understand that there is differences in how their hormonal experience is going to affect their pace, their PB, their physical ability, their pain thresholds. So if we actually start to think about this now when we look at nuance and difference, the future experience is if you can help all people across racial diversity, across gender diversity, understand themselves and understand unique difference, you help optimization with more acceptance of difference, rather than, again, where people are so afraid of technology, where robots are going to take over the world. And there's important things to be considering as dangers and problems with this. But in a real term, accepting difference, understanding difference, and allowing for these disparities in cultural nuance which have been created through societal structures to be broken down, I think is a very exciting and very powerful future.
It is.
And I'm really not just optimistic about it, I see it in what we've built, but also with the way that the tide is turning around how technologies are being built, and you know, the way that this information can become accessible to the every person, not just to people who can afford high-tech interventions as well.
Yeah, like you said, knowledge is power.
Exactly.
What are your thoughts around equality and the feminist movement? Now that you have all this data, you understand women better.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on kind of, you know, roles that women and men play in society? Should they have different jobs? Are they equal? You know, what are your thoughts around this?
I think we gendered people into male and women and men, right? We created these two gender categories and they're very binary. You have women who have very high testosterone, who, or different hormonal balances, for example, not just testosterone, but various different hormonal balances, who have very different lived experiences to any other female body in their orbit, right? So I think what we need to understand in the future of this is not women's roles and men's roles, but your role based on your health and your optimization. So it almost comes down to this: lean into your strengths, right? And it's very binary to think about things in this male-female way. Sorry, not male-female, women and men. But if we look at male-female, yes, there's difference, but there's nuance within those experiences. And your hormone health data is one of the major components to that. And so if you're somebody who operates in a certain way, that I'm going to use the example of like day people and night people, right? And sleep. Some people just fundamentally don't need as much sleep as others, right? If you are one of those people, choosing a role which leans into that experience is as similar to choosing a role where you have like more nurturing instincts and therefore you're leaning into that. Like, understand your body to help you inform the decisions and the type of working practices that are right for you.
So if I ask you the question, who makes a better CEO, women or men? I guess it goes back to your strengths, right?
It goes back to your strengths, but it also depends on the business as well. I think it depends on what you're trying to build and what you're trying to achieve. It depends on a whole other series of factors. This idea that women are going to change the world, and if we just put more women in power, everything will change. I mean, I agree there needs to be some shift, but it's not a matter of just then changing the power dynamic. It's about finding an equilibrium where people can lean into their strengths based on their personality and their body and their chemical balances. And I think the future insights that we're going to have around how our bodies work will inform more gender and kind of more equality in all different facets of society.
Getting back into hormones and cycles now, what are the advantages of women understanding their hormones better? Can they look more youthful? Can they have a better quality of life? Why should they invest their time in kind of learning more about this?
I mean, it affects every facet of your life. So we've talked about work, we've talked about sex, we've talked about relationships, we've talked about all really the foundation pillars of self, right? And I think that's what it comes down to. It's if you don't understand how these chemicals and your body, not just your hormones, because they're part of a myriad of other systems, how your body is impacting on yourself, then you don't have the ability to be optimal in any of those core functions and core pillars of life. So we talk a lot about how to self-development, and it starts with understanding your body. You can't, if we talk about one of the major trends of meditation, right, you can't meditate effectively in the same way every single day, every single month. But if you know that there's nuance and changes, you can lean into a routine or a rhythm with something like that works for you. And so, yeah, I come down to what are the things of our everyday existence that we can improve every day to create a better quality of life. The argument being that by doing those micro behavioral changes to improve your everyday life, you will live longer, have healthier relationships, and the knock-on effect is vast. Mm-hmm. But in the most immediate term, what we know Moody does as a product is it improves your mental health. And when you improve your mental health, you also improve all of those other components, because you can't improve mental health without understanding that there are low points and changes. And we have a lot of people who say, I never really realized that there was as much of a difference in my cycle as when I started to then use the app. And rather than that be a negative thing, it just means that they then are able to optimize their health in a way where they start to feel so much more awake and alive across the entire month, rather than just feeling unsure why something is going wrong or putting it down to just other factors. They're like, oh, this is the foundation.
Great. And just as a last question to close off, what are the 2 or 3 things that you wish you knew when you were younger and that you wish that every young person knows today?
Your hormones affect your mental health, and that happens across the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle, but across every life stage. And starting with your body and how you can understand that will help you understand everything else. So the first thing is body literacy, and that your mental health is affected by hormones. The second thing is around empathy. I wish we learned about empathy in school, and we learned about what that is as an experience for yourself, but also how much that can influence people around you, and the importance of that within building social relationships and building a relationship with yourself. And that is both chemical, neurological, and physical, along with being societal. So I wish we learned about that in school. And then the third thing is, again, I'm going to actually come back to the evidence-based nutritional benefits of omega-3s and magnesium. I wish I understood how powerful baseline supplementation, simple supplementation of things that are evidence-based, good quality, and how much that changes your cognitive and physical productivity and your body's ability to function. We live in a world of overstimulation across technologies, across food, everything. And one thing you can positively contribute is good hydration, taking an omega-3 supplement and taking a magnesium supplement occasionally when you need more rest. I mean, feels pretty easy to implement, I would say.
Yeah. Amy, thank you so much. You've helped unlock some of the mysteries of the woman's body and mind, which I think many will appreciate, both men and women. And the work that you're doing, I think, is going to be really transformational for a lot of people. So thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.